Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
More than 25 years ago, the late Professor Paul Borghi developed an interview series which he called Reflections in Time. It was intended to preserve some of the history of the University of Nebraska at Omaha by recording experiences of people who had contributed to its development. With the aid of the UNO Alumni Association, I've continued Paul's work with this series. My name is Jack Newton. Though I'm retired, I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UNO since 1960, and I served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Professor Borghi and I worked closely in developing his original series, and I continue it today as a tribute to him. It's a beautiful day in the spring, April, or almost April, the year is 2007, and I have as a guest here in the studio Dr. Robert Carlson, who's currently a professor of communication at UNO. Bob, welcome. It's good to have you here with me.
Thank you for having me.
You're in the communication department, but when you came here, was it still a communication department, or?
Yes, when I came here in 1977, the Department of Communication at that time was 2 years old.
Yeah, it had recently been established,
right.
Just 2 years before.
And I am going to correct you right now because we are now the School of Communication.
Oh, that's right. But don't you have departments within the school?
No.
No?
No, it's just the school. We have two major areas, speech communication and mass communication, but they're not formal designations.
They are formal departments.
Right.
Okay. Well, how about broadcasting and...
Okay, broadcasting and journalism fall under mass communication.
Okay. So...
And so many of our faculty have interest and expertise in different areas. I'm not even sure who's in what division sometimes.
Well, we'll talk more about that later, especially since you've got a new college now, too.
Oh, yes.
And that'll be interesting to talk about, because that's brand new also.
That is correct.
And we'll have to find out how that's going. But let's begin by talking a little bit about you, because as long as we've known each other, I haven't really talked with you a whole lot about your background, your roots, as it were. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
Okay, I grew up just outside of Buffalo, New York, and I went to high school and to college there at Canisius College.
Did you go to Canisius High School
and
as
Canisius High School also, yes.
So, yeah, that's just like Tim Russer.
Tim Russer, that's right. He was a couple years behind me.
You didn't overlap at all. He's
no.
You're a little bit older.
I'm a little bit older.
Right. I recently read his biography. It was kind of interesting, the Big Russ book.
Oh, yes. That's wonderful, because he grew up in South Buffalo and I was North Buffalo, but we had a lot in common.
Yeah. And you're both in communication, although in slightly different ways.
That's right.
Well, so you went to college at Canisius College in Buffalo.
Right.
And you graduated in
1977 or 1967.
Okay.
With a degree in physics.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what your major was.
I was a physics major with a minor in math and philosophy.
Wow.
And
well, I have to ask you then how you got interested in communication.
Okay, well, my advisor at the time, when it was time to start thinking about graduate schools, came to me one day and he said, you know, I've been watching you for 4 years now, and I've noticed that you enjoy writing up the labs much more than you enjoy doing them. And I said, well, yeah, that's true. And he said, well, there's this program that had just started at Boston University in science communication, where they took students with hard science undergraduate degrees and placed them in the School of Journalism. And so it sounded appealing, and I applied and got accepted. And so I got my master's in journalism in science communication, which was just a fantastic experience at that time.
And that was at Boston University, so you stayed in the Northeast.
Oh, yes.
But you answered my other question. I was going to ask you how you got to Boston University from Canisius, and you just told me.
Yep, that was how.
Then what did you do? Where'd you go from there?
Well, I had, as an undergraduate, I had taken ROTC and received my commission in the Army. This was during the Vietnam War. So I guess my life was governed for several years trying to figure out how not to get drafted. And by taking ROTC, they allowed me to go on and to graduate school, which I thought was great. And about towards the end of my master's program, I had decided that I wanted to go on for a PhD, and I was going to go to Stanford. And just before I was about to leave for Stanford, the Army contacted me and said, you cannot switch schools. If you started a degree program in a certain school, you could complete that, but you cannot. And they did not have any PhD programs at Boston University that I was interested in. So this time I said, well, okay, I have to go in eventually anyway. Let's just do it. And the Army said fine, and they asked me when I was going to complete my degree, and I said December of 1969. And they said okay. And then I received my orders to report to active duty, and they read January 1970, a year later. And I said, no, I want to go right now. They said, no, you can't. Our rules are. So what was I going to do for a year? Nobody was going to hire me knowing that I was going on active duty. And previous summers I had worked at Cornell Aeronautical Laboratory, which is now Calspan Corporation, as a technical writer. And they were willing to take me back for that year. And they had a contract with the United States Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in Thailand. That was in the final year of the contract. And it's a long story how this all happened. It worked out that my time with them just fit the end of the contract, and they really needed help over there. So I spent most of the year in Thailand and other places in Southeast Asia, getting ready to go on active duty.
But you weren't in the part of Southeast Asia where people were shooting at each other.
Well, not all the time. So then when I came back and went on active duty, and again, it was partly because of the Southeast Asia and some of the things that I had done while I was over there then. It's a real long story how all this happened, but when I actually went on active duty after basic and advanced training and everything, I got assigned to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Now, I'm still not sure exactly how all that came about, but I guess I had my undergraduate degree in physics. My master's was in science communication. I worked for Cornell Aeronautical Laboratory, so if you put all those together, the tracking communication section of NASA as an electronics engineer sounds logical. So after I got out of the Army, I stayed on with NASA as a private contractor and after the end of the Apollo program. We had significant organizational communication problems. And so they hired a consultant, and I got talking to him, and one thing led to another, and I had in the back of my mind that at some point I'd like to go back and get the PhD. And so he he told me, well, you know, I was really becoming interested in organizational communication. He said, well, the top program in the country and the top person was W. Charles Redding, who was at Purdue. So I applied and talked to Professor Redding and was accepted and decided to go back. And my full intention was to go back to NASA after I got my PhD. But then I had the opportunity to be both a teaching and a research assistant at Purdue and really enjoyed teaching, which then kind of led up to the time when I was looking at jobs. And that's where UNO came into.
How did that happen? Tell us about how UNO recruited you.
Well, I was finishing up my dissertation, and one day Charles Redding came to me and said that an old friend of his from the 1940s, Elton Carter, who was former graduate dean here at UNO, had called him and told him about a position they had open here. And Charles thought that it fit my interest, especially since it was a communication department now where speech and journalism were in the same department. And he said, wouldn't you like to go out there for an interview? And I looked at him and I said, no, I'm not interested in going to Omaha. I'd never been here. He said, well, just think about it. And he came back about 2 days later, and he said he had talked again to Elton, and Elton would really like me to come out here for an interview. I said, no, I'm not interested because it would just be a waste of my time and their money. So he went off. The next day he came back, and he stood over my desk, and he looked down at me, and he said, are you finished with your dissertation yet? I said, no. And then he said, you will go to Omaha for an interview, won't you? I said, well, since you phrased it that way, I'll go, but I'm not going to take the job. So I came out for the interview, and it was unlike any experience I had ever had interviewing before. Elton and Jack Brillhart met me at the airport. I remember this just vividly. And I had known both of them from their reputations, and we had used Jack's small group communication book as a textbook. And I'd never met either one of them. And I get off the plane, and there they were standing with signs on them saying, hi, I'm Elton, hi, I'm Jack. And they were dressed, you know, both of them very well, like they normally were. Jack was in jeans and just a casual shirt, and Elton had his straw hat on. And so we leave the airport, we go out and we get into Jack's pickup truck. And he had the shotgun rack in the back of it. And he had been, he was an avid hunter. And some of his, well, he hadn't cleaned out the truck entirely from his hunting experiences, so the odor was quite strong. We get in the truck and we drive down Dodge Street and we come to UNO, and we just drove right past it. And I'm sitting there, what are we doing? Well, they took me out to Regency, where Bozell and Jacobs, the advertising firm, had their offices at the time. And they had put together a multimedia presentation that was designed to sell Omaha to businesses. And it just so happened that the head of the Chamber of Commerce at the time was one of their former students, and he arranged a private showing of this for me. So I was here for 3 days, and the whole 3 days were just like that. They were trying to, everything I saw was just exactly, you know, what I was looking for. But it got, and I met with you, and
I was dean of the college.
Dean of the college at that time, and everything just seemed right. But at the end of the interview, the faculty were assembled, and I finally got up and I said, I came here 3 days ago expecting to answer all kinds of hard questions, and nobody's asked me any yet. And Elton looked up and he said, you know, that's right. What kind of hard question would you like me to ask?
We should stop for just a moment and explain who these people were, because Dr. Carter, Elton Carter, was Dean of the Graduate College at that time.
And he had come back to the Department of Communication full-time.
Oh, he had at that time,
yes,
okay.
He had been former dean.
Right.
And Jack Brillhart was a professor of speech communication.
Right, and was department chairman of speech.
Right. And
I'm not sure just exactly what the timing was then, whether Don Kneffler was the chairman then or...
No, Hugh Cowden was chair of the...
Oh, that's right. We had a communication department then that had already merged together.
Right,
we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, Jack Brillhart and Hugh Cowden were really the...
co-chairs in a way,
the forces behind that.
Right. And Don Kneffler, though, was actually the co-chair, I guess, but was he...
Yeah, that was before my time.
Well, he was overseas, I think, for a year, and when he came back, he found out that he wasn't chair anymore.
Yeah, that was all before my time, but Don was still a professor in the department in broadcasting.
Okay, well, we've at least straightened those folks out. My memory gets a little hazy going back that far, too. Okay, so you, what happened then?
Well, then at the end of this interview, I called up my wife and said, what would you think about coming to Omaha? And, well, she thought about it for a while, and she said, okay, I will come for a year. Now, there was another very nice thing about the area, and she was, my wife Mary Lou was a faculty member teaching nursing at Purdue while I was a graduate student. And her area at the time was maternal and child health nursing, and they had a very good master's program, which she had not completed her master's at UNMC. So she came and was able to get her master's, and then taught at Creighton, and now is back at UNMC. So we came expecting to stay maybe a couple years, and 30 years later, we're still here.
Well, that was before you finished your PhD, too. And so you were working on your dissertation those first few years. I presume you were...
I finished it the first semester I was here.
And I presume then you were hired as an instructor initially, and then when you finished your PhD, you were promoted to a professorial rank, assistant professor.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be pretty typical. Well, tell me something about your first impressions of the campus and the department. What was it like back in 1977?
Well, it was very different than it is today. For one thing, our offices were in temporary buildings from World War II. It's now a parking lot on the east side of Arts and Sciences Hall. And the classrooms that I was teaching were also out there. And those buildings had, well, if you remember them, and there were some Quonset huts out in the area. The heating and cooling systems were very, very bad. One thing, when I just thought about this, the first class that I taught, before I went into the classroom, one of these temporary buildings that just had a partition up and divided the trailer like into two classrooms. There was a history professor who was teaching in the other half, and he came up to me and asked me, he said, would you mind changing halves of the classroom? This one over here is a little bit bigger, you'd have a little bit more room. And he said, in fact, I'm willing to give you $25. And I didn't know any better, and I said, well, fine. You know, it didn't make any difference to me. Well, I found out, though, then that the thermostat was in one side of the building, and there was about a 10-degree difference often between the two halves of the building, and he had now the control of the thermostat.
Did you take the $25?
Yes, I did. But if I had known. So then a couple of weeks later, we had a very warm spell, and I had to have the door to the classroom. There were no screens or anything on this open. And we were invaded by a swarm of yellow jackets.
Yeah, I remember teaching in those buildings myself once or twice. It was an interesting experience. There was every time you opened the door, you either got a blast of hot air or cold air, depending on what the season was.
So, and our offices were there too, and it was very different conditions. And it reminded me, because that was the first year that Del Weber was chancellor, and the first week of classes he came around and just introduced himself to faculty members, which I thought was really nice. And he came over and came in, and he looked around and saw my office, if I can call it that, and I forget who was with him, but he looked at him and said, "These are offices? This has got to change." So it took a couple of years, but he got
there. It did take a while, but actually those buildings worked out very well for us, because they were so bad that when we asked for money to improve the situation, all you had to do was to bring the regents over and let them visit those buildings, and they quickly saw that we weren't just asking for money for no reason. Those were pretty bad places to work. And eventually they were so full of mold. And
oh yes, that was the other thing. The
people
mold.
who had any allergies at all couldn't work in them.
No.
Well, tell me a little bit about what the curriculum was like.
Okay, the curriculum, they were just really in the formation aspects of this new department. Now, we were one of the first departments in the country to merge journalism and mass communication, broadcasting, and speech. And now it's a very, very common model. And so Jack Brillhart and Hugh Cowden and the rest were real pioneers in this area. And so we had sequences in speech and broadcasting and in journalism. And we had a master's program in communication, which we still have today, which is more a theory-based program. And like now, the curriculum's changed a little bit since then, but like now the students have 12 hours in the master's program that they have to take, a foundation seminar in speech communication, a foundation seminar in mass communication, and then foundation seminars in quantitative research methods and qualitative research methods. So that program also was one of the first of its kind. And it was formed because there was a real need for that type of thing.
It was only a couple years before that drama had been included in the speech department. So it was before your time
here. That
here,
was before my time.
But at least that simplified it a little bit. You didn't have dramatic arts in addition to speech communication and the various other aspects of it.
But that's where we are. We've come full cycle, and we're back.
But the man who I mentioned earlier when I was introducing the program, Paul Borghi, was a professor there, and he taught speech courses, and of course he was also heavily involved in the broadcasting curriculum.
Yes. And he had his office across from mine in those little annexes. And he was one of my mentors and just a wonderful person. Yeah, and really a knowledgeable person in the whole area of television, which was still a fairly new area at that time. Yes. It was, but he directed this. Well, the studio we're sitting now, the station KYNE was headed by him for a number of years. He organized it and he founded it, really. He did, and it was really his passion for teaching and students that all of what we're sitting in right now, it was the result of, because he tried to get the students involved any way that he could in actual productions. And yeah, he was a role model for me when I started in this. I watched every single one of his 70-some interviews, and he was a master interviewer. He was so far superior to anybody else I've ever met. And he had a television program. In fact, I sat in this very studio 30 years ago when his show UNO Scene, which he used to do every week.
Right. Well, we started talking a little bit about the administrative structure that you worked in. You had arrived right after the amalgamation of these several departments into a Department of Communication.
Right.
And that, as you said, was an innovative project. And did that work pretty well? Was you were in at almost the beginning of it? Did the people get along together?
That's one of the amazing things, and it's been characteristic of the department now, school, that the different disciplines really have gotten along wonderfully. And I think part of it, too, has to do with the type of people that we hire. There's a lot of people who have interest in these other areas, too. So, and that's been one of the, I think, the real strong points of the Department of Communication, now the school. And I think a testament to that is, over the years, really, we've had very few people who have left before retirement. Mm-hmm. People tend to come here and they stay. And that's because it's a great atmosphere.
And I think it helped too, well, we mentioned this earlier, that you had some very good people working to make it work. Yes. Well, you had Jack Brillhart
Hugh Cowden
in speech communication, and Hugh Cowden in journalism, and they seemed to work very harmoniously together.
Oh, they did. And then Elton Carter in speech, and
right.
People like Warren Franke and Bob Riley in journalism.
Yeah.
And of course Paul, who is everything to everybody, I think.
Yeah, well, that broadcasting curriculum was its existence to him, I'm sure. Well, let's see. As long as we're talking about administrative structure here, let's take it one step further. You're in a new college now.
We sure are.
And it's the college, and it used to be the College of Fine Arts.
Well, there was a College of Fine Arts. There was the radio and television department.
You amalgamated communication with that.
And also the radio and television.
So now
programs.
it is communication, fine arts, and media.
And media, that is correct.
Yeah, I'm glad I got that right. I sometimes struggle a little with some of these things that have happened since I left the full-time work at the university. But how's that going?
Well, it's really progressing well, I think. And we have a new dean this year, and she's got Gail Baker, and she seems to have a real vision for where she wants to go.
And her field was journalism, was it?
Public relations.
Public relations,
right. And when the college was formed, there were a lot of questions, and the idea was part of the idea was to come back to where we were a long time ago in terms of the radio and television here, and becoming, even more a part of the academic program, and that there were strengths that the various units had. Of course, with 3 different cultures, and from the academic side, 2 totally different cultures coming together, we struggled, but finally developed a constitution and bylaws, which we're still refining. And we've been working now for the last 2 years on reappointment, promotion, and tenure guidelines, which I had a meeting this morning about those in a committee that I chair, and I think we're about 95% in agreement now, and hopefully, we will by the end of the semester have a document to go to the full faculty.
But I would guess that it's not nearly as easy an amalgamation as forming a Department of Communication, because you've got, as you said, different cultures. You've got artists primarily, both graphic arts and music and theater and writing, and you've got to kind of put those all together with communication people, some of whom are you almost think of more as social science
Right.
people than you do as...
And some consider themselves humanities.
Right.
And so to try and find guidelines that apply to everyone has been a very difficult process, but I think we're really making good progress.
Now, the kind of sort of, well, almost the way that a lot of people would look at it would be, well, these artists are all prima donnas and hard to get along with. Have you found any of that at all? You don't have to mention names.
No. No, I think, especially on the committees that I've been on, I'm not going to say we have not had our disagreements, because we've had plenty. Sure. But I think we've worked very, very well together. And I'm real pleased with that. And so this is now coming to the end of the second year of this college. And
what seems to make it work? Is it the people or what?
Well, so far it has to be the people and the willingness of the people. And
either that or the goals that they're working toward. That's the other one I was thinking of.
I think, at the beginning there was a lot of opposition from a lot of people, and once people accepted the fact that this was a reality and for everyone's good, I think we just have tremendous potential.
You've played a fairly major role in the establishment of the organization, haven't you?
Yes, and for the 2 years now that we've been part of this new college, I had decided a while ago that I was never going to take another administrative position, but with the way things happened, I was convinced by my colleagues to, for the last 2 years, to be the assistant director of the school. Mm-hmm. Because, well, I was the one with all of the history for one thing, and then in fact, just today I agreed to take an appointment with Dean Baker for next year, a half-time appointment as her special administrative assistant to help implement some of the policies, or to help her implement the policies and things that we have developed over the last
And of course, you've got a good friend in the Vice Chancellor's office, in Debbie Smith-Howell.
Oh, yes. She was one of the real forces in getting the whole college.
Formerly department chair and then school director.
School director when we became a school 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a really top-notch person, so you're lucky in that regard, too. And she's what, assistant to the assistant vice chancellor, associate vice chancellor, assistant.
I think it's associate vice chancellor. I'm not real sure.
She does a marvelous job, anyhow. Of course, she has a degree from the University of Texas.
Yes.
I have to throw that in since I have a son with a degree from the University of Texas too. Well, let's talk about some of your roles as a teacher, because you've done very well in that regard. You've had at least a couple of awards for being one of the outstanding teachers at UNO. Didn't you get the alumni outstanding teacher award, and then the excellence in teaching
and the University
award?
Excellence in Teaching award.
Those are pretty nice honors.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, that's what I see myself primarily as a teacher. That's what I enjoy doing.
Yeah. What have you liked to teach best?
That's one thing, too. With being in the department and now school, over the years I've had an opportunity to teach a wide variety of things, not just in the speech communication area, but I even had a chance a couple times, for various reasons, to teach journalism courses.
Really? That's great. Well, you have that background.
Yes. Now, my primary area is organizational communication, but I've kind of found myself in terms of teaching and what the needs are in the department, teaching the graduate quantitative research methods class and courses like interviewing and persuasion. But I could go on. I enjoy all of them for different reasons.
Sure.
And
what courses have you initiated, developed that weren't there before?
That weren't there before. Well, actually, in some of these cases, the titles were there, but the courses were totally different, like interviewing and persuasion. And the quantitative graduate research methods class, we just had a research methods class, and we decided that we really needed two, one focusing on quantitative and one on qualitative. So
that's the sort of discipline where you really would need that, I should think.
Yes.
And you also, sometimes, I'm sure people in our audience who are not familiar with the, so familiar with the way a university works might not know it, but I imagine you spend a good bit of time supervising master's students, particularly when it comes to writing theses and so on. That's a lot of work.
I've directed over 30 master's theses, and even though we do not have a PhD program here in communication, I've served on PhD
served on committees. That's one of the things that you can do because we're part of because it's a state institution where you can work with people on other campuses if they get to know you and know your expertise and
I've really enjoyed that.
Use of it.
Then that's, if you had to say the one thing that I probably enjoy more now, and that's working with the graduate students on theses. As we get a little bit older, standing and lecturing and grading all those papers gets a little harder.
How do your thought just occurred to me, and so I'll act on it. How do your students usually get the ideas for their thesis? Are there things that, because of programmatic research that you've been doing, they get interested in, or do they come up with something on their own and bring it to you, or how do you? What usually happens?
Well, all of the things that you've mentioned. I've had several students that, because have read my own research and get interested in that and come to me. Sometimes it may be just something that they've picked up in a class that interests them. Sometimes it will be, who knows where they get the ideas. And if it's an area, when I talk to the students, if it's an area that I feel that I have the expertise in, I'm more than willing. That's what makes it fun too, because it's a constant learning experience for myself too.
Yeah, I remember reading a biographical statement once from somebody who did his master's work in the UK at Cambridge, and he said that in order to be admitted, he had to submit a proposal for his master's thesis, and they judged him whether he'd be a good candidate for admission based upon whether he had a project that they thought they could learn something from. I always thought that was a pretty neat thing to do if you could get away with it.
Well, and usually, that's what I hope on everyone that I've directed, that I'm going to learn something also.
Yes. Well, I'd like to talk to you about one other aspect of your time here, because it's something that you and I have in common, and that's your interest in international programs.
Oh, yes.
We both were faculty participants in what's called the Nebraska Semester Abroad. Could you tell me something about that?
Okay, it was 2004 that I directed the Nebraska Semester Abroad. And the program had changed a little bit since the time that you were there. And when I directed it, the program was based entirely from Olomouc, Czech Republic. It was a semester program where we actually stayed in country for 89 days. And the reason for that was if we stayed 90 days, then we had to get a special visa. And we took students, the time when I directed it, we had students from UNO, UNL, UNK, and Wayne State. There have also been students from the other state colleges and other semesters.
And you were the only faculty member?
I was the only faculty member.
There were two of us when I did it.
It was just me.
The students still stay in those dormitories that used to be Russian Army barracks?
Yes. The dormitories actually for the students were very nice, and then everybody was just so wonderful over there, and the students took a full course load. They took language courses, they took, and the Pulaski University, where the program is based, there would be visiting scholars from other parts of Europe too at the time, and they would come in and give lectures. And then we tried every week to do at least one outside trip. Sure. Some of them were just a couple days, but a couple were much longer, or 4 or 5 days. And we took the students to places like Krakow and Auschwitz in Poland, Slovakia, Vienna, Budapest. And then we ended the program with just a wonderful trip through southern Bohemia. And the experience...
this Olomouc, for the benefit of as a geography lesson, I guess, for our audience, is in Moravia.
Moravia.
And that's interesting, too.
In the eastern part of the Czech Republic.
In the eastern part, right near Slovakian border.
Yes.
Did you get into the mountains at all in Slovakia?
Oh, yes.
And the lower Tatras there?
Yes.
That was a beautiful, beautiful spot.
Yeah,
it, to me, always had great potential for attracting a lot more tourists than it does. It does locally now, but and for people in that area of Europe that know about it. But it's such a gorgeous place that you'd think that it would have the possibility of someone coming in and developing it as a major tourist
yes, especially now that they're part of the European Union.
Right, yes.
And on our trips, and I just had the most wonderful experience with my counterparts over there. The two major ones were historians, and they would go with us. They arranged everything, and you would get, it was, I mean, I learned so much every place that we went.
I did too.
And we had, like, one of the great experiences too, we were in Krakow the day in which they became part of the European Union.
So
and the big celebration.
Oh,
it was.
The big square there in the middle of the city, that's a wonderful place. Yeah.
So that, and those type of experiences, I mean, international travel, and actually if you had told me 5 years ago what I was going to do with the rest of my career, it would have been international travel, because I also taught a course in 2 years before the Czech Republic in China.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too. Tell us about
Shanghai. Well, there was a proposal to offer a UNO degree in China. It was in conjunction, it was the International Institute of Information Science and Technology, I believe the whole title was, but it was associated with Fudan University in Shanghai. And I was part of a pilot program to see if it was possible to do. And from the speech side, two of us actually went over there and taught a class, and to see the issues were numerous, even little things like copyright laws on textbooks, which
yes, in China that might be a problem.
Yes. And we had, and from the speech side, we were able to, I think, work out all of we had a very feasible plan. Unfortunately, the funding for the plan and some of the other parts, it seems like this is always the case, just like this year too. UNO has very few problems that a few extra $1 million wouldn't solve. So anyway, that program was not able to be completed, for the university, but it was a great experience. And so, and then the semester abroad program came up, and like I said, I was planning on doing more of those. And then, with the formation of the new college, I got dragged back into some administrative assignments, which is good. But at some point in the future, I think.
Well, those overseas experiences are just. There's just nothing like them. I would recommend them not only for faculty members, but most especially for students. Because I think every student should have that, or take advantage of the many opportunities that exist to travel.
And we were so fortunate at UNO because the students do have available to them scores of programs every year with our sister universities that are very affordable. And
yeah, that semester abroad was cost almost, well, not I was about to say almost nothing, but but for students who had full Pell Grants or something of that sort, they could. That was an extremely inexpensive program.
Oh, very much so. I mean, not much more actually than just paying for the 12 credit hours.
To just live here in Omaha,
right.
And yeah, it was a great experience, and I'd like to see every student have that.
I would too, and I actually brought that up, that that could be part of our requirements.
Yeah, yeah, that's
some type of experience.
Well, we've talked about your teaching now and your experiences here and abroad. Let's talk a little bit about your research work in the time that's remaining, because you've done a lot of that too. A very strong research record, books and papers and all kinds of interesting things. What's your major area of research these days? Has it changed over the years?
Oh, it's changed over the years. It's all related. The last probably about 3 years, we have one of the great things that happened at UNO was the formation of what were called teaching circles and research triangles.
Yes.
And so
I think I retired just about the time those things were getting started,
right.
But they looked like great things.
Where faculty are encouraged, it's usually a nominal fee, like $100 or something, if you do this for the full year, that you are able to spend on some type of books or supplies for for your work. But it encouraged faculty to get together, and in the School of Communication there's been some change in the composition of our research triangle, but now it's Professors Karen Dwyer, Shireen Bingham, Marshall Prisbell, and myself.
These are all faculty members.
These are all faculty members, and at a time, Anna Cruz, a professor in our department, and Dennis Fuss, who retired last year, was a member of the research triangle. And we were looking at a concept, and we developed a scale called the Connected Classroom Climate Inventory, which measures how students feel connected to one another, and then looking at how that influences things like public speaking anxiety in a public speaking course, teacher behaviors, just a wide range of things. And we've been very productive with this, and we've got another paper that we just submitted. I anticipate we're going to be collecting more data next year, and as part of my assignment, I will keep my research assignment. That was one of my conditions. So that's been the major focus recently. Before that, I had some research in health communications, specifically with nursing communication.
Yeah, that was the book that you wrote.
Yes,
was in that area.
Nursing communication. And before that, which led up to that, was research in attitudes toward communication, and specifically a concept known as rhetorical sensitivity, and that's probably what I'm best known for in my work in that area.
Want to tell us what that's about in layman's terms, so that we can all understand it?
It's a statement about the ideal attitude set toward encoding messages. Now, what that means is, what do you think before you say something?
Well, thank you for making it simple enough for me to understand. And
that was a concept that was originally developed by Rod Hart and Don Burks at Purdue University, and when I was there, I became involved in their research, and actually it led up to my dissertation, which was development of a scale to measure this concept. And so then we had an award-winning paper that we presented on the whole concept after several years of research. And so, I mean, it's still today. There was a program a few years ago, 25 years of research on rhetorical sensitivity that was at the National Communication Association convention, which was a lot of fun to go to.
Yeah.
So it's still going strong, but my interest has been more in recent years with this research triangle and
Great.
looking at classroom behaviors. And
We typically at the university we talk about 3 areas of a professor's work. One of them we've talked about is teaching. The other we've just finished talking about is research, or we not necessarily finished. We can go on talking about it if you want to. But the other one is service, both to the university, to the community, to the profession. And you've had a lot of number of those professional service. You,
yes.
If I remember correctly, you review articles for professional journals.
Yes.
Tell us, and you just mentioned attending a meeting of a professional organization. Have you? What's been your role in your profession that way?
Okay, from the professional standpoint, over the years I've been very active in the National Communication Association and also the International Communication Association. But when you mention service, I tend to think it seems like more and more of it becomes lately university service.
Of course.
And I've been I was on the faculty
that's a real time-consuming but important function of any faculty member. Although some do more of it than others.
Yes. I think, not real sure, I think I've served on the Faculty Senate 13 years all total, in a variety of different roles.
Well, I know you were on many committees and councils and special assignments and
it's still
all kinds of things. Which one is the most interesting?
Most interesting?
Of all of those various services?
Well, actually, the most interesting has been the service assignments associated with the formation of the College of
the one we talked about just a little while ago.
I've been chair of the college faculty personnel committee these last 2 years.
What does that involve?
Well, that involves making recommendations to the dean on reappointment,
for promotion, tenure, reappointment, yes.
Faculty development, leaves, fellowships, the name keeps changing, those types of things. But our biggest challenge, and why I agreed to this, was the importance that we just had to have reappointment, promotion, tenure guidelines and procedures so that when new faculty come in, they know exactly what is expected of them, and that there's things in place to make sure that personnel decisions are made fairly and for the good of everyone.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess
with as we've mentioned a little while ago, with so many different disciplines involved, you have different expectations of faculty people. You don't expect a person in the graphic arts to be writing scientific articles.
No. And so how do you come up with wording or guidelines, you know, that will cover everyone? And like I said, we've had both the former College of Fine Arts and the School of Communication had long histories. They developed certain cultures, and unfortunately a lot of the policies and procedures were not written down. They just kind of evolved. So I've seen my primary role the last 2 years to get things that everybody can agree on, and we're almost there. So now my role is going to shift with my new assignment, I think, to as the dean told me, one of her big things now is how do we implement all of these things that we've decided. So I'll be doing what I can to help her in that area.
Now that should be that should be fun. I think it will be. It'll be a challenge, but I think
it will be fun.
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
You know, while we're on the topic, kind of, we've talked about administrative changes, and we're just mentioning it now. How about other changes you've seen over the years on the campus, in the campus itself, in the kinds of students we get? We've talked about the curriculum a little bit. How about the faculty? Or we got different kinds of faculty members now than we used to have? How about the use of technology? All kinds of things we could talk about. But let's talk about changes. We've got just a few minutes left, so let's use
changes.
it that way.
The biggest changes in 30 years, well, are technology. And that's one of our problems too now, is that almost every class, it seems, has technology requirements, but not all of the classrooms on campus have that capability. Now, one of my duties as an assistant director for the last 2 years was scheduling 180 some classes a semester.
Well, give me some examples of what you mean.
Okay, an example would be like a professor is teaching a particular course and absolutely has to have technology available to run PowerPoints, and the whole class is structured around that. And the classroom isn't. Okay,
so he needs to have a computer that'll he can project things onto a screen.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Another example is so many of the classes, the students actually have to do things on computers, like our writing classes.
Yeah.
And there are a limited number of computers and computer classrooms, and we keep the demands of the number of courses that are offered. So, and it's really hard to balance those things out with the demands of the curriculum, because you have to offer certain courses at certain times. So it's just become dependent on technology. So that's one big change. Of course, another big change is just the physical campus.
How about the students?
And
that's
the students,
one thing that I feel a little sad about in some ways, that we seem to have, maybe you can tell me whether my perception's correct, seem to have fewer non-traditional students. Students who are older, students who are part-time.
Okay, I'm not sure that we necessarily have fewer of those students, but more of the younger students.
More of the younger.
Since the residence halls.
And that's good.
That's good.
But I would hate to see it emphasized to the elimination of the...
Oh, I would too.
I think that they were such an important part of this university historically.
I think I'm accurate. When I came here, the average age of students on the UNO campus was over 27 years old.
Well,
and now it's like 22.
We're going to have to wind up.
Oh.
Thank you, Bob. This has been a really pleasant afternoon that went a lot faster than either one of us expected. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today in a visit with Bob Carlson, longtime faculty member at UNO. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UNO as seen through the eyes of those who've made this history. And this is Jack Newton, inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.